The world just froze. Starmer stood before global leaders and dropped words so sharp, so unyielding, that even seasoned diplomats didn't know how to react. The message wasn't hidden behind political doublespeak. It was clear, direct, and pointed straight at Vladimir Putin. For the first time in months, someone dared to call him out, not indirectly, not through vague statements, but with the kind of moral authority that shakes the foundations of power. And the reaction: absolute silence. The kind that lingers in the air when everyone realises they just witnessed history in the making. This isn't another speech. This isn't just politics. This is a turning point, and the world is watching. Starmer didn't start with pleasantries. He didn't sugarcoat the truth or hide behind vague promises. From the first word, it was clear. Britain was sending a warning. Putin, the architect of relentless war and suffering, was being confronted head-on. Putin is the only one standing in the way of peace, Starmer said, and the room went silent. Not the polite, diplomatic kind of silence, the tense, breathless kind that grips every listener. Because they know this moment changes everything. This wasn't about Ukraine's borders alone. This was about the integrity of democracies, the future of freedom, and the moral line that cannot be crossed. The gravity of Starmer's words hit immediately. He painted a picture that no one could ignore. Civilians, families, children, innocent lives caught in the crossfire were not just collateral damage. They were victims of a calculated strategy meant to break the will of nations. And then came the chilling fact. Moscow had been counting on Europe to crumble under pressure, to let economic fatigue, energy shortages, and political doubt erode unity. Starmer named the threat, framed it clearly, and in doing so forced the world to face an uncomfortable truth. The fight wasn't just in Kiev. It was in every home across Britain, in every city in Europe where ordinary people were being asked to endure hardship for the sake of principle. Starmer didn't just describe the threat, he turned it into a call to action. You are defending not only Ukraine, but the values that protect our own homes, our children, our future, he said. And just like that, foreign policy became personal, national identity intertwined with moral responsibility. The British people, and by extension all democracies watching, were no longer spectators. They were participants in a struggle that tested the very core of their resolve. And Putin knew it, because once a democracy stakes its identity on principle, backing down is no longer an option. The UK didn't stop at words. Starmer announced sweeping sanctions against every major Russian oil company, a move unprecedented in scale and boldness. Not partial measures, not symbolic gestures, but a direct financial strike aimed at crippling the machinery that fuels Russia's war. Within days, other major Western powers followed. Together, they created what analysts now call a chokehold on Putin's resources, a strategic squeeze designed to limit his ability to continue aggression. And yet, Starmer's speech wasn't only about sanctions, it was about clarity, about giving people a reason to endure short-term hardship for long-term survival. Energy bills rising, inflation stubborn, political opposition criticising support for Ukraine. These were the realities, but Starmer reframed them. He presented them not as a burden, but as a test of commitment, a measure of whether democracies could hold firm when the cost became real. The strategy behind Starmer's words was meticulous. Advisors worked for weeks, crafting sentences, choosing every word with precision, knowing the speech would reverberate far beyond Westminster. And it did. Russia's reaction was swift, as state media dismissed it as Western hysteria, but insiders knew it was anything but hysteria. They were watching the same polls, measuring public patience and understanding that this speech was not just a warning to Putin, it was a signal to the world. Starmer was declaring that Britain would no longer follow, it would lead. And leadership in times like these carries enormous risk. The ripple effects were immediate. Poland and the Baltic states hailed the speech. Seeing a strong, unyielding ally, Brussels recognised it as the clearest pro-European message from London in years. But tension brewed elsewhere. France and Germany expressed concern, populist voices questioned sacrifice, and doubts that Putin has long hoped to cultivate began to... Starmer didn't just speak for headlines, he spoke for history. Every phrase was calculated to leave no ambiguity, to make clear that Britain was no longer tolerating half measures or diplomatic ambiguity. He turned global attention toward Putin in a way few leaders dare, highlighting not only the human cost of Russia's aggression, but also the strategic deception behind it. This war isn't about borders, he said. It's about breaking the spirit of democracies. And he was right. Putin's strategy has never been simply military, it has been psychological. It's a war of attrition designed to fracture alliances, test patience, and exploit every crack in European unity. Starmer made it clear that this tactic would not work on Britain. That for the first time in months, a Western leader had looked at the Kremlin, looked at the world, and refused to blink. The effect was immediate. Journalists who had spent years covering international conflicts were visibly shaken, some whispering to one another as if the implications of what they were witnessing were only beginning to sink in. Starmer framed the crisis in stark terms. Innocent lives are being destroyed, energy systems are under siege, inflation is climbing, and public patience is thinning. But instead of offering empty reassurances, he drew a line in the sand. He didn't promise an easy winter. He didn't minimize the hardships that would come with confronting Russia's aggression. He made the cost unmistakable and in doing so made the stakes crystal clear. It wasn't just about Ukraine's survival. It was about whether democratic societies could endure pressure without surrendering their principles. Every word was a signal. Britain was prepared to act decisively, to lead economically, politically and morally. Even as Putin tried to test the limits of resilience, he announced that sanctions would extend beyond oil, encompassing financial institutions, oligarch networks and shell companies funneling illicit wealth into the global economy. These weren't abstract threats, they were actionable strategies designed to squeeze the Kremlin and make clear that continued aggression carries consequences. Intelligence insiders quickly pointed out the risks: cyber attacks, coordinated disinformation, hybrid warfare designed to destabilise Britain without a single shot fired. Starmer's response: calm, deliberate and unwavering. He wasn't bluffing, and the Kremlin understood it. The rules had changed. Containment was no longer sufficient. Confrontation was on the table. Starmer didn't shy away from naming the consequences, from outlining the political realities both at home and abroad. Europe's fragile cohesion was being tested, and he positioned Britain as the anchor of resistance, the standard bearer for unity and moral clarity. Poland, the Baltic states and other Eastern European nations cheered this new posture, seeing it as the leadership they had been waiting for. While countries with deeper economic and political entanglements, like France and Germany, hesitated, weighing risk against principle. Across Europe, populist voices began echoing Putin's preferred narrative. How much should ordinary citizens sacrifice for someone else's war? Starmer, anticipating this, reframed the debate. Sacrifice, he argued, was not an imposition, but a necessity if democracy was to survive. He connected distant battlefields to the homes of voters, the kitchens of families, the bank accounts of citizens, making the abstract very tangible. This was not moral posturing, it was a strategic recalibration of national purpose. Starmer made it clear that the West's unity, its credibility and its survival were all under direct threat, and that if democracies faltered under the pressure, the consequences would ripple far beyond Ukraine. The stakes were personal and political. Putin's strategy relies on fatigue, political, social, economic and moral fatigue. He counts on democracies growing weary of hardship, on citizens demanding a return to comfort over principle. But Starmer refused to let fatigue dictate policy. He demanded clarity, resilience and conviction. The UK, he signalled, would lead where others hesitated, setting a benchmark for both Europe and the world. Every diplomat, every analyst, every citizen who listened understood what this meant. Britain was no longer following the lead of Washington or Brussels. Britain was establishing a new standard of leadership, and it came with consequences both for the Kremlin and for every other nation watching. The implications were profound. Putin would have to reckon not only with military resistance, but with a united front that refused to be broken by economic pressure or political doubt. And Starmer didn't stop at warnings. He painted a vision of endurance, of steadfastness, of a democracy willing to pay short-term costs to preserve long-term freedom. He tied the war in Ukraine to the very survival of democratic values in Europe and beyond, making